Welcome to the Sportsline Podcast. Hey, we're just about a month away from the holiday season. Certainly appreciate you checking us out on the CHCH multimedia platform. Of course, I'm Bubba O'Neil. As you know, this podcast is a space for the many extraordinary athletes, coaches, executives, and broadcasters that got their start in sports right here in Southern Ontario. Well, this Western University grad has a passion for sports, and by betting on himself, he has had the opportunity over the last 2 decades to write, edit, and present at some of the sport's most iconic networks and publications. Now, his expertise, the National Hockey League, and in particular, David Altair has covered the Toronto Maple Leafs from bow to stern, doing so on a daily basis, whether the team is at home or on the road. So let's bring him right now. The Leafs getting ready to go on that Florida road trip, but so we got a day or two just to slip him in here before he hops on that plane. David, it's great to see you again. It's been a long time.
Yeah, we miss you around these parts, you know, Bubba. It's been a long time. I can't even remember. Was it pre-COVID last time I saw you with, or
pretty much
post?
pretty much with the Maple Leafs beat, and I know you're there every day, practice, road games, the home games, even the off days. I'm sure you're still there. So how are things going with the hockey beat?
Yeah, you know, it's unique. There are times where I find myself on the road and I'm one of only 2, or just times it's been myself, and it's very different. It's you know, as the world kind of shifts to kind of reporting more from remote, I've kind of leaned against it. And I feel like face-to-face interaction and being on location is still paramount in terms of telling the story and effectively building those relationships. So I've been pretty fortunate to go every game since the 2021 playoffs against Montreal. Actually, the game against the Panthers will be my 300th consecutive regular season plus playoff game, home or road, being on site, which is crazy to me. But yeah, it's been a bit of a grind, but it's been an enjoyable grind, and certainly thankful to be able to go to and fro everywhere, so to speak.
You know, the neat thing about your career is that you have, and I mean this honestly, you look at your resume and the things that you have done, and as I said off the top, you've had your name affixed to some of the most iconic brands in all of sports, and that's got to be a good feeling for you.
It is when you look back on it. You know, I got my dream job pretty early, and I was really fortunate. As coming out of Western, I did a lot of campus radio at CHW. I called CIS, well, not CIS anymore, U Sports football games. And I really wanted to kind of work in this industry, and I was really kind of hell-bent on trying to make it work. And then, you know, I grew up listening to The Fan. I snuck in a dollar store Walkman going to bed during the early 90s, you know, those runs of the Jays and the Leafs and all that stuff. And then when I got an internship and eventually employed by The Fan, it was a dream come true. And I didn't really see myself doing anything else at that point. That's really what I wanted to do. But, you know, the industry is what it is. And after an 8-year employment, we parted ways. And, you know, I have had a lot of stops along the way, and I've done a lot of great things. When I look back on it, it was really enjoyable, and I've learned everything from everywhere I've been. But it's certainly not the course I planned. I've always been very loyal to a fault, and I've always kind of wanted to stay in one place for a long period of time. But it's not the nature of the industry anymore. And that's kind of unfortunate, but it can be fortunate. If you can maneuver around how everything's being redefined, you can really make it work for yourself.
Well, you've certainly done that and continue to do so at a very, very high level. So certainly congratulations on that. As I said, you know, obviously the National Hockey League is your expertise, and in particular the Toronto Maple Leafs. And it's, you know, it's strange to me when I look at this team. Obviously the big change is Craig Berube is the head coach over Sheldon Keefe after he had a 5+ year run. And I just sort of looked at their record after 21 games, 13-6-2. And then I look back at previous records, and it's been kind of the same over Sheldon Keefe. But yet, to me, and maybe you can help me with this, David, I feel like the team's different this year. Am I just imagining that?
No, you're not. I mean, look, if you look at all the underlying metrics or even some of the standard metrics, and you take the record out of the equation, you see it's a much more defensive-minded team. Like the expected goals against is way down. The block shots are way up. The save percentage among both goaltenders is way up. And the offense, and at times the 5-on-5 offense is really dried up. But the defense has been that much better that it hasn't raised alarms for concern, at least in the short term. And the results have been the same, but the goals for are down. So it's just a different way the Leafs are winning. And it was kind of what was, I guess, promised under Brad Treliving when he came in, that he wanted to be a more defensive-minded team and improve in that regard. They've always had the weapons. Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner, John Tavares, William Nylander, they've always been offensive threats. But the defense has really been the issue. And so, the goaltending, they improved it, but the defense in front of it has been that much better with Chris Tanev, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, so even Simone Benoit, who came in last year. The block shots are just way up. And so when you're watching it, it's kind of boring. And it's kind of funny when I brought up the boring details to Craig Berube on the road once, and he was trying to put that, he was like, it's not boring, it's just doing the responsible things that help get you wins. And so, yeah, there's been times where I'll admit I'm like, I was there against Utah, and there's stretches where you're like, oh, fans are, like it's the right way to play. And in the playoffs, these are going to be the way you win games, but you miss the razzle dazzle a little bit that came with some of the teams from yesteryear.
The crazy thing to me is the 13 victories out of 21 contests. You add in the two games were decided in overtime. So the points percentage is pretty good, but yet they're doing it with six forwards out of the action, including the guy that scored 70 goals last year in Austin Matthews. So this, as you said, responsible sort of approach, but it's amazing to me that they're doing this with some of the injuries that they have, especially to Austin Matthews.
Yeah, but what's really funny about that? I looked at that in past years, and maybe they haven't had as many injuries at the forward group, but they've had defensive injuries. Like I remember 2 years ago, the Leafs were down 4 of their top 6 defensemen or whatever it was, and they'd gone through 12 defensemen throughout the whole year as a result, and they were still managing to get these results. Morgan Riley, kind of funny enough, when we spoke to him a week ago and he brought up the record without Austin Matthews, he's like, well, the record without me is pretty good too. And he was right. Like during that 5-game suspension that he missed, the Leafs won all 5 games. Like last year. So he remembered that. And I think it just speaks to, depth is the cliche, perhaps, but I think it also speaks to the fact that when stars are out, the other stars that are there have this tendency to they'll never admit it publicly, but it's kind of an ego thing where they really want to show that this is where they can make their marks. So Mitch Marner has done an excellent job of that, producing, in the 7-1-0 record without Austin Matthews, he's got 2 points in those 7 wins per game. So he's lighting it up. John Tavares, who's been kind of dismissed to some degree last year, is having a much better year this year. And so William Nylander continues to produce as well. And so when you have these guys go out, the stars that are there in place of the other stars that are missing are expected to carry the load. And that's certainly what they've done. And it's not unlike what they've done in previous years. You expect the dam to break, but it hasn't. And they're leading the division as a result of it.
Well, Mitch Marner has been outstanding to my eyes. A team leading 28 points. He's put the puck in, 8 times. I know Berube continually says that he wants him to shoot more, and maybe from your eyes that maybe he should be shooting more as well too. But obviously there's this ongoing soap opera, if you want to take it that. It's so different in Toronto than many other markets of the contract and the fact that he's playing on the final year of his deal. And are you surprised that really hasn't affected him? Or it hasn't been more of a conversation, because I thought it was going to be something that was looming over him all season long.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, because he'd gone through this where he was in the final year of his entry level contract, and he wasn't signed. He was a restricted free agent, and he continued to put up numbers. So I'm not really surprised at that. I have differing views over maybe some others about kind of where that should go. I mean, they're already well into this season. Mitch Marner's performing well. And, last year around this time, William Nylander was performing well, and they signed him in January because they just kind of made this decision at that point. Okay, they've got to do it. Where I'm of the belief that, if there isn't playoff success yet, why are you doing it now? And to me, they're already so far along this that I think it behooves both sides to just wait until the playoffs are done to see if it's worth continuing on. There's a lot of people being like, well, the price is going to go up and all this other stuff. The cap's going to go up, so the price is going to go up. But at least if you have the tangible results in front of you as an organization, you're okay with paying the increase. I just don't understand buying high when you can buy lower, or you can kind of figure that out, or you should have done it before. So I think the Leafs are in a situation now where it just makes sense for them to wait. I don't buy this talk that it's going to be a distraction in the playoffs, because, these are professional athletes that are supposed to perform, and the playoffs is where the Leafs haven't over the last 7-8 years with this core group. So I think they got to wait it out, but I'm not surprised regular season wise that Mitch Marner's performing as well as he has. He's always been this type of player, and the fact that there's no contract shouldn't have had any bearing on how he was going to perform this year.
You've seen his entire career. You've seen him practice. You've seen him play. You've seen him in the postseason. Where does he fit financially with, I'm going to put him up against William Nylander and, of course, Austin Matthews. Where does he fit? So I guess that's 11.5 for William Nylander, and I guess 13 and change, 14 for Austin Matthews?
Yeah, so it's funny because I don't think it's as simple as that anymore, especially with the word that came out. With the word that came out a couple of weeks ago, or maybe it was a week ago, that the salary cap could go up to as much as $95 million for the upcoming season, which is above the 5% per year increase that has been projected. And so because of that, I think a lot of things are in the process of getting redefined. And when you look at percentage of cap, it's tough to say. So Marner's at 10.9 right now, and that was on a 6-year deal. If he wants to go 8, that cap hit might be higher. If he wants to go lower, that cap might be lower. But if he goes 8, it would be hard for, and the Leafs have playoff success, it'll be hard for them to argue that he doesn't match Austin Matthews, only because Austin Matthews is going to far exceed that number in his next deal if he's going to commit to 8 years, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of it isn't just like what it is on an average annual basis. It's the cap going up tremendously. Like we're looking at potentially like a 105, 110 cap in the next CBA.
Wow.
2 years from. Like everything is getting redefined, like when the NBA had their TV.
Right.
League. Like the cap went up so slowly, and that they were trying to figure this all out, that it didn't look like the cap was going to go up meaningfully. And now, it's a different world that Mitch Marner is entering a contract year into, and that could play to his advantage, where that number can go higher. It certainly looks like it's going to be above William Nylander's no matter what. But again, if the Leafs don't perform well in the playoffs and the ask is too high, maybe he walks away, or the team walks away from him. There's just so much at stake that can't be answered right now.
It's crazy. I look at their goaltending, and I've always been of the belief that you need a stud goaltender, because you look at what New York doing. They got Shesterkin, and Hellebuyck has been unbelievable with the Bruins, and yet they paced Jeremy Swayman big dollars in Boston. Now, I think this is also a product of what's going on in the whole team, and the fact that they've got to actually replenish some talent from some age. Swayman's struggling. So it's interesting that the Maple Leafs go the route of having these two goaltenders in Joe Woll, who seemingly can't stay healthy, and Anthony Stolarz. Who is this guy? I've never heard of him. He's a backup goaltender in Florida. But, David, it's working.
Yeah, it is working, and a lot of it is a combination of things. Those goaltenders are always above average goaltenders for sure. They've shown the numbers. They've played well in front of good teams. And the Leafs are leaning heavily into their defense, and the players in front of them are performing really well as well. And that's not taking anything away from Stolarz and Woll. Heading into last night, I haven't looked today, but heading into last night, they had the third best team save percentage in the NHL. And that included the two games that Hildeby played, right? So you factor all that in, you look at where the team is, and you look at the goaltenders. I'm with you. I have a goalie bias. Like, I played goal as a kid. So I always lean that way, but I have a different way of looking at it. I have a different formula for how Stanley Cup teams can kind of be built. And, Colorado did redefine it with who their goaltender was. And here's what I look at goaltending, and I look at forwards, and I look at defense equally. If you have the top two in 2 out of any 3 of those, you have a cup contender. You can actually have a below average of the other to make it work. So when Colorado went on a tear and their goaltending was whatever, I think that's because no one could argue at the time that their forwards and defense were elite. Like, it really was. Yeah. So they can kind of make up for that. The Rangers on the other side, like, they had pieces, but you could argue their forwards maybe weren't in the top 2. They had good defense, they had good goaltending. And so what happened? They're up there, right? Like, there's ways for that to work. And so I think the Leafs are banking on, the goaltending going to be above average. The forwards in the top and the defense will work its way to the point where they're top 2 and they can do some real damage. Because right now we're watching these games, and what do they remind you of? They remind you of these tight, not a lot of room for error kind of games that you win in playoffs, right? I think that's where the Leafs are kind of situated now, and they're trying to model themselves after, so that it's not just flipping the switch in the playoffs, that they've got this muscle memory and they can play this way in the playoffs and win games this way. So yeah, it's tough. I think these goaltenders have been all right, but we'll see what happens when the going gets tough. Both of them do not have a lot of experience playing deep into a season where they've got to be the guy or a split half the amount of games. And so that's still a question. And we're only 21, 22 games in. So we'll see how this conversation goes midway through the year.
During the Sheldon Keefe era, it was always this Florida road trip was kind of the litmus test of where are the Leafs right now. And, of course, they lead the Atlantic Division right now. I like to believe it's a better division now that I think the Sabres are kind of coming on a little bit. I think the Senators are certainly, I think they always seem to give the Leafs a little bit of some problems. But, they're up and down a little bit. Detroit hopefully could be a little better. So I think that overall the Atlantic is a better division than it's been in the years. Of course, playing Tampa and Florida coming up next, the defending Stanley Cup champions. Again, is this the same litmus test for the Maple Leafs?
I mean, it can be for sure. I mean, it's the Florida Panthers are the defending Stanley Cup champions, and they really have built a model for having all the pieces in there. They're like, it wasn't a fluke that they went to the Cup final and then backed it up with the Stanley Cup championship. How they got to the Cup final surprised many for sure when they were the last seeded team and upset the best regular season team in history in the Boston Bruins the year before. But they carried and built that off. They built their team. You saw that was coming, even though they were 8th or whatever it was as a wild card team. You saw in that final post deadline in the regular season that they were building the momentum that they could do some real damage if they got past Boston. And so they've carried that forward. Matthew Tkachuk is the perfect quintessential playoff type performer who's got the skill, but will, defend and muck it up and do whatever he needs to do to help push his team reach them and get to that next level. And so Florida is certainly one of those tests for sure. So they've got a lot of pieces there. Toronto's got 2 trips there, so I don't know how much you can take stock in one of them. But that Florida trip is certainly one. They had one early last year too, and I think they performed okay. It's tough. It's hard to just look at the divisional games because there's so few compared to the 82. Right. That's why a lot of people hate this divisional playoff format, because they play their division so few compared to the rest of the balanced schedule of the league, yet the playoffs aren't balanced that way. It's very division heavy. So it's hard for me to isolate it that way. But I am curious, to your point, to see how this team measures up against the Stanley Cup champions, because they have modeled themselves very differently.
On an NHL basis, what's your biggest surprise?
This year?
Yeah. Who's your biggest surprise right now?
Columbus Blue Jackets. I don't think they're getting their flowers. I mean, they're kind of a 500 team right now, but they've beaten some really good teams. They just beat the Carolina Hurricanes in a shootout. They went through a devastating loss in Johnny Gaudreau. And that team is really picking out some character wins. Like, I think they're kind of left for not doing a lot this season, and no one would blame them. And they're just pulling out these amazing victories over good teams. The way they punished Toronto, like they handed Toronto their worst loss of the season. I was there for that one. They've beaten some really good teams. So, Boston makes a coaching change after losing to Columbus, and it's kind of seen as embarrassing. But I don't think a lot of people are looking at Columbus in isolation and saying, hey, you know what? They're beating some really good teams here, given their personnel, given what was expected of them. So to me, that's really the big surprise from a good story standpoint. I can't say Boston is a surprise that they are struggling a little bit, just because I've written them off so many years because they were expected for it. So I would say there's that. And then, I think Toronto is a surprise where they are well, too, because, I don't think a lot of people thought they had it in them to play consistent defensive hockey and still produce the results, or that it was going to take some time. And the fact that they're leading the division right now, to me, is a bit of a surprise as well.
Biggest disappointment?
Edmonton Oilers. I expected the Edmonton Oilers to come out guns a-blazing after losing the Cup final in a similar fashion to what the Florida Panthers were like last year, and it hasn't happened. Now they're getting some results, and it's been okay, but I think this is more disappointing than their start last year, even though they recovered from that, because I just expected so much more of them. I expected them to be leading the league overall and creating some separation, and that just has not happened.
No, I'm with you. I expected them to just start blowing out people early, and there would be some drop-off maybe in January or whatever. But based on the fact that the crowd, the expectation, the talent that they obviously have, they arguably have the two best forwards in all of the National Hockey League, and yet it's just not there. And I know McDavid was away for a little bit, but it was only 2 or 3 games. But, yeah, I think they're a team to watch out. And I don't like their goaltender. I would just say it right now. I don't trust their goaltender. But anyway, that's just me. Now, I can't leave this conversation without going here. Now, my memory serves me correctly, as I can remember many conversations in the Leafs dressing room, and of course, just, all the media talking, that there was a certain team in the National Hockey League that David Altair likes. And I have to bring this up because my boss is a huge Lions fan, and there's a couple of Lions fans in this building that are doing a whole lot of talking at 10-1. They're doing a whole lot of talking with this soft NFC North, the Bears and Packers next. You wait till you see my Bills on December the 12th. You have to be the happiest man going right now in terms of your outside hockey life, in terms of your football fandom.
Yes, it's so if you talk to any lifelong Lions fans and not bandwagon jumpers, it's still weird. It's still weird to get used to, because you just got used to watching Lions games with existential dread all the time. and I would watch it and just, expect them to find ways to lose. So now you're watching them and they're finding ways to win. And it's really strange. And I'm happy. Don't get me wrong. I'm really happy about it. But, I just... Yeah, it's real. I don't smack talk that much, because the other thing, too, is, even when good things happen to the Lions, it's not perfect. I'm still not 100% sold on Jared Goff, even though he's had an amazing season. And I don't like the fact that in a division where they're 10-1, 2 of their big rivals are just 1 and 2 games behind them. I hate that. I absolutely hate that. Why they can't have a decent enough run where there's some separation there. They'll make the playoffs even if they don't win the division, but I hate that Green Bay and Minnesota are 1 and 2 games back. I really do. So listen, I was a Dan Campbell. I was a Dan Campbell fan from day one. A lot of people made fun. Yes, I don't have it around me, but and I have the proof. So when they hired him, I got really excited. Everyone was making fun of him and all that stuff, but if you look at who the coaches were before, they were just coaches that did not care about that market. They were just there to make their mark personally as a head coach, and that's it. And you can tell this guy gave a you-know-what. That day, or not that day, but week one, even though they started 0-10-1, I bought my first Detroit Lions hat in years. And it's the 2021 NFL sideline hat. It's gray with a black Lions logo and a Honolulu blue outline. That is the hat I wear all the time, because that's the hat that I showed that this guy was my guy from day one. And he's proven me right, and that's what I'm really happy about. I want that guy to coach my life, because he is that good. And I believe in the NFL now, with how systematic everything is. Your head coach does not need to be the best X's and O's guy at all. If you have the best DC, or like a top 3 or 4 OC in DC, your head guy just needs to be a leader. Like, that's all he really needs to be, and that's exactly who he is. And he is a lot of why they are where they are right now.
You and I'm going to share some social media tweets back and forth on December the 12th when you meet my Bears and we go into Detroit City.
I wish I could go to that, but the Leafs have so the Leafs are in Detroit the day before that game.
Oh,
and so I'll be in Detroit, but then I got to come back because that Sunday the Leafs are playing the Sabres.
Now, Gary Bettman, what are you doing? You can't play on the same day as this.
That's the whole Amazon Prime thing. The Leafs have more Sundays. The Leafs have more Sundays now because Canadian teams are not allowed to play on Monday unless it's an Amazon Prime game. So that's why there's been a lot of weirdness with the schedule this year than there has been. So it was really funny. Craig Berube, when they didn't play on Saturday, he's like, I didn't think it was allowed for the Leafs to not play on a Saturday. So there's been a lot of different stakeholders playing around with the schedule, and I'm bummed. I did go see the Lions when the Leafs were in DC last year. And they were in Baltimore, and they were down 35-0 in the third quarter, and I left. And they were 5-1 going in. I was like, of course, this is my luck. The one game I go, and it's like the most embarrassing performance in a little while. So that's why it's weird. Like, I have this love-hate relationship with the Lions, but don't get me wrong, they are my team forever. And so, let's hope. But there's still some things that make me feel like, don't get too excited.
Well, Dave, this has been fantastic. I wish you all the best with the Maple Leafs and your coverage of it. You do such an outstanding job, and no matter who you're working for, you get the job done. And so enjoy the season. Enjoy your Lions. We'll talk on the December 12th, and I really appreciate you giving us our time.
You got it, Bubba. Thanks again for having me on. It was my pleasure.
Well, folks, that's your Sportsline Podcast for the day. And you've just seen and heard, we love talking sports. If you do know of an athlete, team, or event to promote, the Sportsline Podcast do want to hear from you. Please hit that thumbs up, like, and subscribe button. If you have something to say, please comment. Hey, folks, just before we go, our popular Christmas toy drive is underway, and we do have a new main sponsor this year. It's JR Toys, located in Burlington. For any toy that is purchased at JR Toys, a donation will be made to the drive, so it's kind of like a double-shot donation. And, of course, there is the e-transfer option, as you see on the screen. In addition, believe it or not, hair dryers, curling irons, and body care packs from your local drugstore are in huge demand. And with your donation and help, we are going to be helping more folks all over the Hamilton region and Brant County. So for the wonderful people that do make the Sportsline Podcast possible, thank you for your donation. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you real soon.